Hi everyone, my name is Melody and you are listening to Melody's Musings. Welcome, I'm so glad you stopped by today. I am going to cover a subject today that's a little bit hard to hear, but I think it has value because, we're all in the process of healing one way or another in our lives. We all go through trials and tribulations, and I guess today I just want to reach out to anybody who is feeling stuck or feeling as if they need some fresh motivation, or I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say here, but I want to share a couple of things from my own life. I'm going to start with a poem that was written by my own mother before she passed away in 2021. And I asked her for permission before she passed if I could put this poem in the beginning of a book that I started to write several years ago, because I felt that it matched very well with the theme of the book. And I'll talk more about the book after I read the poem. But I share this, as I said, in the spirit of helping anybody out there who is having a hard time right now. So, without further ado, I'm going to read this poem. My mother's name was Patricia, and the name of the poem is Pinocchio. I stuffed my feelings deep inside. I hid them well because of pride. I dared not show how great my pain, for fear you'd view me with disdain. My daddy taught me to be strong. Showing weakness was all wrong. Protect yourself, don't be weak. Only martyrs comfort seek. And so I learned acceptance of rejection, insults, lack of love. On the outside, I didn't care, but the child inside was in despair. I'm not a martyr, thank the Lord. My heart hurts and wounds are safely stored where prying eyes can never see. The lonely, wounded, fearful me. So year by year, because of pride, my buried feelings petrified. When one breaks loose and tries to yell, I lock it back into its cell. I've been wooden for so long, a strength to others who thought me strong. I'm afraid to let you see, there's quite another, weaker me. I can take what you dish out, my skin is tough without a doubt. But now, two people live in me, the one I am and the one you see. I'm so afraid of being real. Will it hurt? How will it feel? Hiding hurts is my forte. Can I survive another way? Oh, God above, please help me know. You love me, you're Pinocchio. You love the child I really am, without pretense, without sham. And if I'll let you make me real, vulnerable, human, so I can feel, I won't need that old facade. I'll be safe at last in the love of God. Let's see, how long ago was it? Oh gosh, it was the early 2000s when I started to write the story of my my first marriage and what happened there. I'm going to share the preface and some other excerpts from this book, which is not completely finished yet. I have a lot of different irons in the fire, so my writing projects have been on hold for too long, but I have decided that I'm going to spend the winter months catching up on all the writing projects that are in various stages of completion at this moment. The name of this book is Broken Dreams, a true story of heartbreak, hardship, and healing. And I selected the following scripture for the preface. I'm going to pause here for just a moment and center myself. Primarily because this is a difficult topic for me. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised and oppressed. That was a scripture, that was actually a quote that Jesus said, and he was quoting Isaiah. Okay, so my intent in sharing this information is not to bring anybody down, but hopefully to encourage you. As I've said in some of my previous videos, I've dealt with a lot of hardship in my life, and this is one of those stories of hardship that I've been through. The introduction is called Full Circle. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with it because it's going to be a little bit of a longer video than some of the others. So I hope you're comfortable wherever you are. 6 months into their marriage, she and her husband had an intense argument over what started out to be a simple difference of opinion on the drive home after work. When they arrived home, she did what she did nearly every weeknight. She kicked off her shoes, went into the kitchen, and started cooking supper. He did what he usually did, flicked on the television set, and sat back without another word to watch the show until dinner was ready. A few minutes later, she sensed that he was standing a couple of feet behind her, but before she could stop stirring the contents of the pot on the stove and turn around, he kicked her as hard as he could from the backside, still wearing his pointy-toed dress shoes. Shocked, she whirled around with tears in her eyes, asking, "What was that for?" She'll never forget those green eyes filled with rage glaring at her as she was told in no uncertain terms that she was a rebellious wife for not agreeing with his opinion on the matter that we argued about earlier in the car. After all, she was reminded, everyone knows that according to the Bible, a good Christian wife is to always agree with her husband and should never express an opinion that differs from his, whether in public or in private. Instinctively, she bolted for the front door of their tiny apartment, sobbing as she went. She had been taught from childhood that in a Christian home, when angry outbursts occurred, the individuals involved were to exercise self-control and separate from one another for a short time until both parties were able to discuss the matter at hand in a calm and rational manner. Apparently that was not part of his training, even though he too grew up in a Christian home. Either that or he decided not to employ that option at this particular moment. He beat her to the door, quickly locked the deadbolt, and threw himself against it, arms and legs spread wide, his body resembling the letter X, successfully barring her access to the world outside. "Where do you think you're going?" he sneered. "I'm going to take a walk around the block. I need some fresh air right now. And to clear my head, I need to think." "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. "You are going to stay right here in this apartment until we work this thing out. Even if it takes all night." That door was the only exit from the small apartment. If she couldn't get out that way, she was trapped. Still sobbing, she tried to pry his arms away from the door, but he was 5'9", 160-pound athlete, and at 5'5", her tiny 110-pound frame was no match for his muscular build. He picked her up, carried her to the couch, and dropped her there as if she were a small child. They continued to argue for the next 3 solid hours, well into the night, until they both dropped from exhaustion. The original issue remained unresolved. This set the tone and pattern for how conflict resolution would play out for the rest of their married life. Okay, so fast forward to almost 20 years later. One night, just a couple of months prior to their 20th anniversary, all the painful memories of abuse came whirling back around her like a savage tornado that suddenly forms out of nowhere. That night, history repeated itself when her husband had lashed out at her again, similar to the way he had attacked her 19 years earlier. One major difference between then and now was that as a result of a freak accident 14 years earlier, he was now a C4, 5, and 6 quadriplegic, confined to a wheelchair, paralyzed from the armpits down, but still able to move his arms by using his shoulder muscles. He had been taught how to do that while in rehab after he was injured. Now, she was his full-time caregiver, at his beck and call 24/7. Tonight they were in the process of transferring him from the wheelchair to his hospital bed, a routine that took no less than 2 hours every night. Placing the middle of the top edge of the strong nylon sling made of mesh in her mouth, she gripped it with her teeth as she worked from behind his wheelchair with both hands to position the sling under his backside in an even manner. She then draped the top of the sling, which was even with the top of his shoulders, over the back of the wheelchair until the sling was in proper position to safely lift and move him to the bed. Walking around to the front of the wheelchair, she bent forward from the waist and, with her head between his knees, reached under each of his thighs one at a time to pull the straps of the sling underneath the opposite thigh, just above the bend behind the knee. This created a crisscross swing of sorts formation, similar to the safety swing seats at a playground made for infants to keep them from falling out. Each leg of the straps had a single large metal ring sewn into the sling at the end. Each ring now protruded from under the outer edge of each knee. 2 identical metal rings were also affixed to the top corners of the sling that she had draped behind him. The sling was now in position to hook all 4 corners to the 4 heavy-duty chains suspended from an inverted V of the Hoyer lift. The next step in the process involved pumping the pneumatic handle several times to suspend him in midair, still in a sitting position, and slowly guide the U-shaped lift's rolling base a few feet across the bedroom to the pre-prepared hospital bed. Then she positioned the base under the bed while suspending his 230-pound frame over the bed. A push of a button on the Hoyer lift handle slowly lowered him down to the mattress until he lay flat on his back on the bed. Over the past 14 years, she had performed this bedtime routine task in the exact same manner over 5,000 times. That's an estimation. However, 3 weeks prior to this night, he had insisted that she change the way she pulled the leg straps up under his legs because he said it was causing pain in his hips. Even though paralyzed, quads can still sense pain in their lower extremities, which then radiates up to whatever point on their body they still have feeling. In his case, he had feeling from the top of his shoulders to the top of his scalp. She had gladly complied with his wishes, as she often did, if for no other reason than to keep the peace. The last thing she needed was for him to be in pain, get angry, and blame her, as was his usual custom. However, tonight she was distracted, her mind preoccupied with anything other than the well-ingrained routine she now could perform with her eyes shut. Without realizing it, she accidentally reverted to the old way of positioning the sling, as the new way was not yet a habit. With her head still down between his knees, while wrestling with the leg straps, without a word, he quietly reared his right arm back and hooked it around the right handle on the back of the wheelchair. He often did this to enable an upper body stretch when needed. Unbeknownst to her, this time he wasn't stretching. The next thing she knew, without warning, he brought the full force of his upper body weight via his right arm down with as much momentum as he could muster, smacking her as hard as he could, the metal stay sewn into the bowling splint he wore on his hand, making blunt contact with her left ear and the left side of her face. Whoosh! Smack! Taken aback, she raised her head enough to look in his eyes with tears in hers and asked, "What was that for?" "You know we changed the routine 3 weeks ago, and you deliberately did it the old way tonight, just to hurt me." His beet red face, only a few shades darker than his auburn hair, set off by his green eyes, which were blazing in their sockets more than usual. She stared at him in shock and disbelief, cupping her throbbing ear, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, hon. I was momentarily preoccupied and must have slipped into the old way of doing it without thinking. You know I would never hurt you. Why on earth would I do that? You think I want to upset you? Don't you know me by now?" Still sobbing, she silently completed the transfer of his body from the wheelchair to the bed. Throughout this process, he kept the verbal barrage of accusations flying in her direction, throwing in a choice expletive now and then. He knew she hated it when he swore at her. It was not the language a Christian man would use toward his wife. It offended her to the core, yet lately he'd been doing it anyway. The words he spoke to her seemed like fiery arrows aimed straight at her heart. She remained silent on the outside, but on the inside, a light switch had flipped on, somewhere in the back of her mind. Pain, anguish, denial, and despair, and all of their cousins that she thought she had buried for the past 19 years in the darkest recesses of her heart, instantly materialized before her. It was as if they now stood center stage against a giant spotlight, staring directly at her. They looked much older than she remembered. The abuse had now come full circle. Later that night, after he finally fell into a fitful sleep, she flashed back in her mind to the first time he had attacked her physically in the tiny kitchen of their first apartment. Painful memories raced through her mind. All of the emotional abuse she had endured during their nearly 19 years of marriage, both before and after his injury, flooded her consciousness. She had sacrificed so many of the best years of her life for this man, truly believing in her heart that he loved her and that he was as committed to their marriage as she was. In the beginning, she even foolishly believed that if she could only show him how it felt to be truly loved and not rejected, surely he would change for the better. Many years later, she had even tried to get him to go to counseling with her on more than one occasion and was told sarcastically, "Go ahead if you think you need it. I'm fine. You're the one with the problem." After nearly 20 years of denial, she finally mustered the courage to ask herself the question she should have asked a long time ago. And the question was this: if nothing changes for the next 20 years, do I think I can keep living like this and stay sane? The answer was a resounding no. Never one to go with an initial hasty reaction over the next 3 weeks as she went through the motions of daily life. She prayed often and wrestled constantly with the tough decision of whether or not to end the abusive marriage. As a Christian wife who started out not believing that divorce was even a moral option for her, she was in absolute mental agony over how to handle the situation. She felt numb and dead on the inside. 3 options occurred to her as she sat there. Option 1: She could kill herself, but then their teenage daughter would have to grow up without a mom in her life. Even though she didn't want to keep living like this, she wasn't ready to die. This was not a desirable option. Option 2. She could kill him. Also not a good option. She'd surely go to prison for life. And what kind of life was that? What judge or jury would believe that her disabled husband was physically and emotionally abusive toward her? Besides, she didn't want to murder him. She just couldn't bear to live with him anymore. Option 2 was scrapped. Option 3. She could walk away. This was the only viable option. Going through legal channels was the only sane way to end the abuse. But she knew if she walked away, it would not be easy. She also knew that if she announced her plan in advance, he'd slam the prison doors shut and she'd never get out. No, she'd have to quietly prepare to leave and not tell a soul. Heart pounding, she slowly circled option 3. After that, she grew more and more withdrawn from him emotionally each day, speaking to him as little as possible. The pain she felt deep inside put her in full retreat mode. Each day was a blur of activity, but at night, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, even though exhausted from the day's toil, she sat at her dining room table and did what she had done her entire life whenever she had to make a major decision. She created a pros and cons list. More pros, she would stay. More cons, she would end the marriage and leave. Some might call it a brain dump on paper, but regardless of what it is called, she got it all out in black and white. The good, the bad, and the ugly. All of it. In the end, the cons outweighed the pros by a healthy margin. Cons it was. She was done trying to appease this abusive man, hold together this impossible marriage, and continue this charade of a loving Christian family. Her long nightmare was about to come to an end. Here's an aerial view. As you may have guessed by now, the excerpt I just read is an overview of my story from 30,000 feet, a snapshot of my personal journey through the cycle of domestic abuse, heartbreak, and hardship. The rest of this book tells the story of all that transpired between these two incidents and the time of healing that followed. If my story were to be made into a movie, it could not be easily shoehorned into one particular genre. It would be a tearjerker, a mystery, an action adventure, a romantic comedy, a horror tale, and a tragic love story, all rolled into one. It is a story of complexity, intrigue, mystery, and at times, absurd dichotomy. It provides brief glimpses into the otherwise invisible spiritual battles that rage unseen around mankind, namely, the epic battles between good and evil, life and death, destiny and denial, truth and deception, love, hate, faith, and unbelief. And I'm trying to decide whether or not to add the rest of this for this particular video. I think I'll save it for another one because I don't want this one to be as long. But, oh, let me pick this up. I just want to say that I encourage anyone who is going through domestic abuse or even emotional abuse or sexual abuse by someone who is supposed to love them, says that they love them, pretends that they love them when out in public, but behind closed doors, it's a different story. I've been there. I was there for 19 years in this first marriage. And I'm not going to say that, our whole marriage was a disaster, because it wasn't. We did have some good times together. And we had a beautiful, beautiful baby girl who is the pride of my heart and my deepest joy. She's a gift from God to me. But I just want you guys to understand that you don't have to stay like I did in an abusive marriage or relationship or partnership or whatever. You don't have to stay there. There are ways to get help. Reach out to your family. Reach out to other people. I kept all of this inside for so long. I didn't want people to see the pain that I was feeling or feel burdened by my problems. Anyway, I hope that this story brings clarity to anyone who is struggling with a relationship that is more of a burden to them than it is a vehicle of growth and love, which is what it should be. And regardless of your belief system or your faith, whatever it is that you believe in and put your faith in, you don't have to let the tapes in your head that were put there when you were a child dictate whether you will continue to allow yourself to be abused, or you will move yourself to calmer waters. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage and strength and determination to break out of a relationship that has reached its expiration date. Just like something in the refrigerator that needs to be tossed. Because the most important thing, even when you're married or in a relationship, this is just something that I've learned over the years from personal experience that I'm not exactly proud of. The most important thing for you to remember is that you must make yourself a priority in order to block out the external voices that are telling you you're not worthy, you're not loved the way you thought you would be, that you're nothing, that you can't make it without another person. And that other person only offers you pain. You got to back away from that. Take a pause in your life and really think about it. Get alone. Do whatever you have to do to get alone somewhere where you can think without other people yapping in your ear. And figure out once and for all that you are not going to allow yourself to be picked on like that, or to be ridiculed, or to be put down when you know in your soul deep that you don't deserve that. I went into my first marriage with a lot of illusions and idealism. I was very naive back then. And also a lot of, religious dogma that told me that I had to be a second-class citizen in my own life, just because I happened to be the female. And I never thought that was fair. Ever. Because going back to the first part of this whole story, when we were arguing in the car that day on the way home from work, it was over something stupid. I can't even remember now what we were arguing about, but it was just dumb. And I think back on it now, and I just think, I don't know why, because my mother taught me when I was growing up. She was a single mom of 5 girls, for the most part. I mean, we had a daddy for 10 or 12 years in the home. Until she remarried. But she always taught us as young girls to think for ourselves, to have opinions, to be well-read, and, to not take someone else's opinion of what was right and what was wrong, but that we were to do our own investigating and really think about things. But to know that we had the freedom, and we should be independent women who think for ourselves and act accordingly. And I think that if I were to regret anything, it's just that I didn't carry that training into my first marriage, because first of all, I was blindsided. I didn't grow up in an abusive household, so I didn't even know what that looked like. Much less did I know how to set boundaries or deal with so many of the things that I found myself, face to face with. So I kind of had to figure it out as I went along. And in the back of my mind, I had this little tape going, well, you're a godly woman, so you shouldn't, question. When he says you're a rebellious wife, even though you know in your heart that you're not, you're just being who you are. I don't know why I accepted that from him. Now, I have since, of course, that happened. That was 46 years ago. I got married young the first time. So I was still pretty much a baby. But since then, I have grown, I've matured, and he and I actually became friends before he passed away last year. He was just shy of 40 years in the wheelchair. And there's a lot more that I could say about that, but I'm going to end it here. I will be back later today with another video, sort of along the same lines, just giving you additional snapshots of what I've been through in my life and how the hardships that I've endured and the pain have made me a very strong person, for the most part. It's not that I'm immune to pain or hardship now, because there are times when I do feel those things. But I don't let them determine how I'm going to move forward and how I'm going to turn the page when things like that happen and keep moving forward. Life is too short to live it in Miseryville. I'm going to end it there, folks. I hope you were able to gain some insight through this part of my story. For many years, I didn't want to talk about this in public. Because it brought up too many painful memories. But I do feel now that it's been enough time. I've had enough healing. And if I can help even one other person out there who is suffering in an abusive relationship of any kind, then I feel like all of the pain and struggle and suffering that I've been through will be worth it all. I love each and every one of you. And I'll pray for those of you that this message resonated with, that you can find freedom and work your way back to actually finding yourself, the real you, the one that longs to live free and to have a happy life. Okay, you guys. I'm going to need a Kleenex after this one. I'll be back, like I said, later today with another couple of stories, I think. If not today, then for sure tomorrow. Okay. Love you very much. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for listening. And I hope it helped. God bless you.